Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan NMS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war update extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Sorry about the last couple of days. Just been up in the north of England. In fact, just got back from a, 4 or 5 hour drive non-stop from Blackburn to the south coast. After getting up at 4:45 in the morning for like patch time for my son's ice skating competition. Anyway, whatever, you don't really care about that, but it's been a really long day, so hopefully I can make it through this video in a coherent manner because my brain is frazzled. Right, I'm going to start with finishing the serialization of this article by Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant, who's a British member of the British Armed Forces. I don't know if he's retired, but anyway, he's been in Ukraine since 2010 working with the Ukrainians. And this is an article that voices his criticisms of the Ukrainian army from a cultural point of view, from a doctrinal point of view, and kind of saying, look, these are the issues, this is how it should be. But interestingly, a number of these criticisms have already been answered, and the Ukrainian army are taking this seriously and appear to be at least trying to right the wrongs listed here. And it's also worth remembering that this is nothing to do with the courage of the Ukrainians, so on and so forth, and the very many great things they do. This is kind of in spite of that, but all those things are in spite of these issues. But it's also worth remembering that all of these issues the Russian army has in spades, right? Even to an even greater degree than the Ukrainians have here. So this article is Ukrainian forces need to learn hard lessons as they fight Russian invasion. And I've been through these. This is what the 6th serialization of this I've done. So I've been through all these different topic headings here, and talk to you also about what, in some of the cases, what the Ukrainians are doing to mitigate against these issues or to change these issues, solve these issues. And we're just going to come down, as you can see, it's a very long article, very detailed, it covers a lot of ground. And the last section here is the logistics. Before we go on to the conclusion, which is a very short conclusion because it's all in what we've gone through already. So logistics. Okay, the current logistics system, with what system there is heavily centralized, suboptimal, and piecemeal. While many areas, such as the supply of foreign equipment to units, have reached an amazing level of quality, in other areas, like the supply of personal equipment, medical supply, or vehicle maintenance, it still labours under Soviet methods. Now, we've seen how drones and SUVs can get their way to the front line like this due to the fact that third-party organizations are doing an amazing job of getting that to those troops. There's an argument to say, well, actually, that's not their job, and those things should be provided by the MOD in a coherent, cohesive manner. Working with all the different sections of the army or the armed forces and any kind of civilian components thereof. All this needs to be managed centrally. It's not to talk about like a Soviet hierarchical kind of style thing here, but there does need to be a kind of centralized uniformity and cohesion to what takes place in terms of logistics. He continues, the truth that logistics is broken in places can be judged by the fact that some units rely on NGOs and volunteers for large parts of their battle equipment and daily supplies. A little later, maintenance and repair must be close to the battle area, not in Poland. Imagine that a brigade is a piece of equipment requiring electricity. So before we talk about that, it's worth noting that here's one area where they have improved as well. So we've heard recently that they don't need to send certain bits of artillery, certain artillery pieces to Poland to get fixed now that they are fixing them in Ukraine. So these things, that won't be the case for all of the bits, particularly the foreign stuff like the Caesars and Panzer 2000s. But they are working hard to get these things fixed in Ukraine. So Grant talks about this when in terms of electricity supply and sockets. When you move the equipment from room to room, you simply plug it into another electrical socket. Each area should have a socket of logistics and, where needed, an extension lead so that no brigade has to go more than an hour drive to get what it needs. Okay, the logistics power socket in this description should cover the basic elements of combat supply: medical supply and evacuation, unit combat supplies of food, fuel, ammunition, batteries, vehicle spares, and drones, personal equipment of all types registered on IT with no paper required, reach back ability for technical equipment to allow replacement and repair of phones, computers, and radios, forward maintenance of all soft skin and armored vehicles up to engine and barrel changes and minor body repair, and forward maintenance of technical equipment like weapon sights, drones, radios, etc. So that just needs to happen. It needs to happen, much closer to the front line than it presently does. And that's, this is the ideal, of course it is. And it's very difficult to change these things in the middle of a war. But still, if they want to operate as optimally as possible, these kind of things need to happen. So that finishes off all the areas that show room for improvement. And the conclusion is reliance upon courage is far too expensive for Ukraine in the long run. Too much blood is being spilt, and more could prove disastrous to the nation. It is better to analyze the weakest defense areas and improve policies, laws, systems, and organizations. It's also time to replace some of the older generation who remain fixed in their ways for younger, more agile, and battle tested commanders. This is not to suggest the older commanders have not played their part, they have. But now, a new way of fighting is needed that values life and identifies how to use the scarce national resources to the maximum with improved strategies and tactics. And it is really easy to get ourselves personally, we're invested. If you're pro-Ukrainian, you're invested in this war, in the time and mental energy that you've put towards following this war and supporting this war, and perhaps money in supporting this war as well. And so it's easy to take this personally, and any criticism against the Ukrainian army, you can get defensive and go no, and you push back rather than saying, well, what do I know? I'm not there, and this guy clearly knows more than I do. So rather than get defensive, we need to take these kind of ideas on board and hope that Ukraine themselves take these ideas on board, which they appear to be doing. It's not wise, I think, to bury our heads in the sand and just hope everything's going to go well. If you are pro-Ukrainian, that is, uh, truth needs to be out in order to improve. Like, if you don't admit you've got a problem, then you're never going to go about solving that problem. People talk about growth mindset, but you can. I said this the other day, talking about addiction. If you don't admit you've got an addiction problem, then you can't do anything to solve that problem. So if you don't admit, whether that be us on the sidelines, okay, really important whether we admit it or not. But if these issues aren't recognised by the Ukrainian army, then there's no hope of having them solved. Then they will continue to operate suboptimally. Anyway, enough waffling on about that. Let's go to a few little bits and pieces to show you. Here's just a nice, interesting little video. I wonder whether drone operators have competitions with each other to see whether they can, drop hand grenades in hatches better than the next guy or whatever, who can get the most impressive IED dropping scenario. Well, this is near Avdiivka T-72 tank. That's a first-person view drone, so that's a drone where it looks in the direction it's flying rather than looks down. Often these are sort of racing drones. Here's a first-person view drone that flies into the hatch of a tank. Ugh. Sorry, I always say this, but just shut up. Sorry. Anyway, here is the FPV drone, and I don't know. That doesn't look. Oh, bounces around and goes in, and then bosh. I don't know if that is abandoned, or if it is abandoned. I don't know. It's hard to tell these days, but it might be abandoned. I don't know if that track's off. To be honest, track could be off. Look at that smoke coming out the barrel as well. It probably is abandoned. No one gets out the tank, but it does also look in fairly good nick otherwise. And this is, where you can start talking about how the Russians have a complete lack of ARVs, armored recovery vehicles, such that tanks like this seem to be in perfectly good nick, other than maybe a track that's off. That should be an easy fix. Get that recovered, and we just talked about logistics. An hour, yeah, perfect. I love it when a plan comes together. You've got here, forward maintenance of all soft skin and armor vehicles up to engine and barrel changes and minor body repair, including track repair, which is, it's a simple one. Get that back an hour away, repaired, and it's back on the field. But no, it appears to be abandoned because tracks come off. What can we do? We got any ARVs? No. Well, I guess we've got to get out and run back to our lines. And that appears to be what happens. Okay, another bit of drone footage. When I saw this the other day, I was like, "Oh my goodness!" First of all, I was like, "What's going on? Have they been shot?" And no, they haven't been shot because they get up and run away afterwards. But anyway, here's a drone that is following a bunch of guys from a trench. I don't know for what reason, whether it's just spotting these guys, but they are not aware of the drone above them at the moment. But as they're walking off here, they do become aware. They obviously hear it, look up, and look what happens. So 3 of them run away. 3 of them, I thought they'd just been shot and dropped dead, but they haven't. They're playing dead because that appears to be, it's like FFF. Fight, flee or freeze, right? And some of them flee and some of them freeze. In this case, it's like if we play dead, then the drone will go and chase after the other guys. So, but of course, the drone is just seeing them fall down. It's like, you're not dead. We've just seen you fall over. Like, come on, guys. But it doesn't appear that this drone has any kind of IDs or anything on board. But I guess the idea is, look, if we pretend to be dead, they're not going to waste an ID on us. They're going to go and drop them on the others, type thing. But it's fascinating that starting to see that. I'm intrigued by the playing possum reflex I see more and more Russians have. They drop and lay absolutely still. Amazing how just the sound of a drone flying above completely disrupts them. They're engulfed by fear of imminent death. And I saw, and I may have shared it with you before, like someone talking about how the fear factor plays really heavily on people, even when there aren't drones, even when you're just sitting in your trenches. You just must be always on edge that anything is looking at you at any time. And just in this technological age where it must breed paranoia. This kind of warfare really must breed paranoia. Right, I'm going to now go through a journal, Wall Street Journal, article on Orikhiv. Let's talk about Orikhiv. You might say, where is that? Let's go and show that to you. It is, let's have a look here. It's down on the Zaporizhia front line, or near the Zaporizhia front line. There it is. It's that town there. To the south of there have been these reconnaissance and force moves recently by Ukrainians. Previously, in the month before that, there were Russians sort of pushing up towards it. Anyway, this is a, sorry about that pinging, an article on that town. So, battered by year of shelling, frontline city yearns for Ukrainian offensive. So, read a few pertinent paragraphs. Orikhiv, Ukraine. Only 3 people remain in a 9-story block of 146 apartments in this frontline city of southern Ukraine. For the past several months, they have been living in a basement using a small generator because daily Russian shelling has long disrupted electric supplies to Orikhiv. And it goes on later with someone saying, so this is Serhiy Andrushchenko. These days, the Russians loot everything. They come into homes and leave just empty walls behind. All the equipment of the farmers, all the entrepreneurs, is gone, he said. We hope that they are stealing like this now because they are planning to go. And the article continues, only some 2,000 people out of the pre-war population of 14,000 remain in Orikhiv, with some residents daring to return for a few days when Russian shelling eases and then fleeing again when fighting flares up. I find that fascinating, the fact that people will come back, yeah, it's all right just for a bit, and then a couple of days of heavy shelling, they're like, no, we're off ski. Again, reinforcing windows here with chipboard and all sorts, just closing up shop in the hope that it will survive the war. In one of the classrooms, the blackboard still has the homework from February the 23rd, 2022, the last day of peace, an elementary school essay on the topic, Daddy bought Ola ice skates, and there it is there. So a stark reminder of the length of this conflict there. Uh, on a recent day, Tetiana Kudzova was uh, Kudzova, yes, well done me, was leaving the laundromat, which is free for the remaining residents, with two large bundles of freshly washed clothes, one for herself and one for her 91-year-old mother. We have no water, no power, no gas at home, nothing, she sighed. I don't have any strength to live like that anymore and would have left long ago, but Mama, she doesn't want to leave. She doesn't want to go anywhere. So her mother's 91 now. There's an awful lot of evidence to suggest that most people that are left in these sorts of towns that are really close to the front line, or places like Bakhmut even, and Avdivka, are you're vulnerable and you're old. People who are actually unable to um, to get out of places like that. They are the least likely to leave because they're the least able to leave. Sorry, I thought that was my son banging on the door. Then it's a hamster in a hamster wheel. Gee whiz. So apologies. Yeah, just the people who stay behind in these places are the people who can't leave, the most vulnerable in society. Um, yeah, so her mother doesn't want to go anywhere, but however, it goes on to talk about someone who actually ships their parents out but stays himself, and then goes on to talk about Ms. Karnaushenko said she had been separated from her mother, who lives roughly 10 miles away on the Russian side of the front line, for more than a year. I'm very much looking forward to our offensive that will push the Russians away, she said. I want to see my mama again. I would be the first one sitting on a tank if I could. I thought that was just a really interesting concept, that you may have plenty of families. I haven't really thought about this, who have been split by front lines, and in some of these places, front lines that have been there now for a year in broadly the same sort of place. There will be plenty of people that have relatives just 10 miles to the south, uh, unable to see them and living in completely different situations. Just yeah, so that's quite an interesting little article there. Lots more in there, but I've only picked out a couple of pertinent bits. Now, for the next article, I tried to pick out pertinent bits, but it turns out the whole article is pertinent, so I might end up reading pretty much all of it. This is in foreign policy, right? And this is about Swiss neutrality. It's a very, very interesting article for a whole bunch of reasons. Partly because I don't know that much about Swiss politics. So if there's any Swiss people watching this, I'd be really interested if this is accurate. I'd be really interested in your opinion. Please put it in the thread below. And it probably will depend where you sit on the political axis or quadrant, or however you like to define yourself. And let it be known that certainly in the opening paragraph here, it is pretty combative against the Swiss position. So this is foreign policy, which has some pretty decent articles, and I think this is a decent article in giving quite an introduction to the problem of neutrality here. Now, there may be Swiss people or others who are very in favour of neutrality. I've said many times, I don't. Neutrality is fine, and having an export arms industry is fine, if you like, right? If you're going to have an export arms industry, right, this is how it works. But neutrality and an export arms industry, that doesn't work for me, and I find it incoherent. So I don't think Swiss neutrality works. I mean, it could work. You just ditch having an arms industry, ditch that, or certainly an export arms industry. Ditch that. Your neutrality makes a load more sense. But there's also lots of other problems to do with historically dealing with Nazis and things like that, in terms of like, well, really, what was your neutrality? Is there, there's some double standards going on there? Anyway, this article looks into a whole bunch of this. Let's go through it and see what you think. Swiss neutrality makes no sense anymore. Switzerland's refusal to take sides in Ukraine only benefits Russia. And this is by a Brussels-based columnist for foreign policy, Anshel Vohra. Switzerland has a history of trading with Nazis, so it's right out of the gate, this is bosh. Serving as a tax haven for the world's corrupt officials, ooh, and claiming the moral high ground in global politics, ouch. That's because of its tradition of neutrality, which dates back to the 1500s and was codified in the Hague Convention of 1907. Its preferred involvement in international conflicts has been to offer luxury hotels amid lofty mountains as venues for holding peace talks. But Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Switzerland's continued insistence on not getting involved in a war that threatens all of Europe has irritated Western countries that had previously accepted its claims of neutrality. There is growing criticism in Western capitals at just how easy Bern has had it all these years. At the start of the war last year, Switzerland agreed to impose sanctions on Russia, which included freezing assets of Russian oligarchs, denying airspace to Russian planes, and imposing a travel ban on some men in Russian President Vladimir Putin's entourage. It was hailed as a watershed moment in Swiss foreign policy, but Western diplomats say Bern should have done much more. Right, this is interesting. So, neutrality is an interesting word because, in a sense, that is not neutrality. So already there you could claim that there are double standards at play here. You're saying we are going to harm Russia's attempt to do war, but we're going to do it financially and not militarily. But that financially has a military ramification. And so, in a sense, it's a false distinction. I would love to philosophically look at this, but now's not the time because this is going to be quite a long look at this article anyway. But there's a real issue I have with claiming to be neutral, so that you can't provide arms even to third parties, like not even directly. You can't allow the sale of arms or the gifting of arms that you've manufactured previously to find their way through third parties to this country, but you can do all these things directly to Russia or directly for Ukraine, financially, structurally, infrastructurally. And I just think there's a false distinction then, because these have military ramifications, as I said. So Scott Miller, the US ambassador to Bern, said that Switzerland could easily increase its freezing of assets belonging to Russian oligarchs from $8 billion to $109 billion. He urged the Swiss to rethink their neutrality and contended it's not a static construct. Switzerland can't call itself neutral and allow either side to exploit that position, added Miller, suggesting Russia was taking advantage of its stance. Yes. But it's not looking, it goes on to say, it's not looking like it's going to reconsider its neutrality. And we've got the issue of these other countries who want to re-export Swiss-made weapons, and that's not allowed. And talking about how the German ambassadors to Switzerland said the position is incomprehensible. Germany's defense ministry has appealed to Switzerland, asking for more than 12,000 35mm rounds of Swiss-made ammunition for Gepard air defense tanks that Ukraine needs to protect its cities, so defensively needs them. And Germany's now manufacturing themselves. So, and this is what I talked about before. So now Germany's making them themselves, which is like it makes no sense in neutrality and having the export arms industry, because from a business point of view, your export arms industry is going to get screwed. It's going to lose money. It's going to lose contracts. You've got all this stuff that you've made, right? You can't sell it on. So what's happening? Germany's going to make it instead. So you are going to lose money, you're going to lose contracts, because now people aren't going to buy stuff off of you because they know they can't re-export it in times of need, or when they might need to raise some extra cash or whatever. And so if you've got a choice, and I'm not sure the Swiss is going to be hugely cheaper either, if you've got a choice between buying Swiss X or another country's X, and you're like, well, if we buy Swiss X at either the same price or even possibly more expensive, and we've got all these stipulations attached to it, or we can buy another country's X, and we don't have those stipulations attached to it, then we're going to go to the other country. So what happens to the Swiss arms industry? It implodes. And there has been pressure from the Swiss arms industry to repeal some of this legislation. So earlier this month, the article continues, the Swiss Parliament discussed an initial proposal that would have allowed the re-export of Ukraine if the suppliers were like-minded nations, but it was rejected by a majority. So it's interesting. So politically, the neutrality is holding quite firmly. The vote was telling at just how deeply entrenched Switzerland's neutrality is, even if it comes at the expense of an embattled nation fighting for its independence. Quote, Switzerland will not reconsider neutrality, not fundamentally, because it doesn't depend on the kind of conflict, not if someone is on the right side or the wrong side. So it doesn't depend on the kind of conflict. It doesn't matter that we've got someone getting done over here unfairly. It's just that's the way it is. We're neutral. Anyway, that's me adding to that. Said Laurent Grotchel, the director of the Swiss Peace Research Institute and a professor of political science at the University of Basel. Switzerland's various political parties have disparate reasons to protect the neutral status. And this is where it gets interesting and political. And I wasn't aware of the political situation in Switzerland. The populists in Switzerland, he says, want to stick to an orthodox interpretation of neutrality because it better fits the country's interests, he added. And many of those on the left and among the Greens are pacifists. So you have differing reasons why people want to keep the neutrality here between the kind of people to the further to the right and people further to the left. But for those on the right, the support of neutrality may be masking an active affinity for Putin. This is where it gets really interesting, and I've talked about this before in terms of US politics, but I don't want to open that can of worms because people always attack me for that. In this recent speech, and it links the speech, commemorating the first anniversary of Ukraine's invasion, and I talked about this, the speech by Putin. Putin accused the West of destroying the institution of family as well as the, quote, cultural and national identity by, quote, forcing the priests to bless same-sex marriages and exploring the idea of a gender-neutral God. And I talked about that and how bonkers it was, especially for this nation when it was in its Soviet Union iteration, was just not talking in terms of this kind of a language, especially when you know concerning God and religion. The comments were tailor-made to lure far-right politicians across Europe, not just Europe, who are against progressive values. This is really important. I talked about this on my Atypical Philosopher video the other day, and how they're using religion and cultural values to not so much to generate support domestically and to be divisive domestically and us and them domestically, but actually to appeal to fringes or proportions of populations or lawmakers in other countries. So when you say all these trigger words that, like, you know, conservative family values or woke this or that, you know, people pay attention in other countries, go, yeah. And then you end up gaining their sympathies. And so then they say, no, we don't want to give money to Ukraine, to supporting Ukraine, because actually we kind of side with the values that Putin is talking about there. Really interesting way of sowing discord politically, internationally. Anyway, sorry, to continue. So among those are leaders of the Populist Swiss People's Party, SVP, the largest in the Swiss parliament. So we've got a right-wing populist party, which calls for a strict interpretation of Swiss neutrality in the Ukraine war and has been instrumental in blocking the supply of Swiss-made weapons in Ukraine. Interesting. So it's possibly not just about neutrality here, but about actually a political alignment with what Putin has been saying. Quote, there's not a little bit of neutrality, said Yves Niediger, a member of the SVP who sits on the Foreign Policy Commission of Switzerland. On social issues, he seems to be in sync with the Russian president. In one recent message on Facebook, he posted a parody of a Pink Floyd song declaring, we don't need woke education. And again, this talk about, you know, woke, and I don't want to open that can of worms, but trying to get people to define actually what woke is hilarious. There was a campaigner, really good video you can watch on YouTube of an anti-woke campaigner in America who was live on TV and literally is, I think, written a book against woke or something like that. And the interviewer said, can you just define what woke is? And she broke down. She went and she froze. She said, "Oh, this is going to be one of those viral moments, isn't it?" Yeah, it is. Completely was not able to articulate, as a campaigner against woke, not able to articulate what woke was. Anyway, I thought it was really funny. But my point here is that this ends up not being about neutrality. There's other things at play here, and this is what this foreign policy article is really interesting for, because it's alerting me to these far more nuanced situations. Roger Kurpel, another member of the SVP and editor-in-chief of the hard-right political weekly Weltwoche, is described in the local media as a Putin sympathizer and a friend of Russia. Again, this might not be about, hey, we just want to be neutral. Nah, sounds like, that's what it is on the surface, but underneath there are other desires and intentions going on. He believes that the Russian president is vilified because he, quote, stands for manhood, and prophesied that Putin might be the shock the West needs to come back to its senses. So when you've got a government who is saying, no, we're not going to change the law on neutrality, no, we're not going to allow re-export of these bits of ammunition or whatever, and you're saying, and we're doing that for neutrality, and you're like, and you're finding out that at least some of these people are Putin sympathizers, you're like, yeah, okay, there might be other things happening here. Such comments reflect how the SVP might see an ally in Putin when it comes to propagating its social values. Grrr said some leaders on the far right identify with Putin, quote, because he has a similar stance on LGBTQ and woke culture, end quote. Moreover, like other populist parties in Europe, the SVP believes that Russia is serving as a counterweight to Washington. This is just so Putin-esque. This is so like the thinkers in the Kremlin must just be like, yes, this is exactly what we want when we are sowing this division, when we're putting this stuff on social media. Like, this is how it manifests itself. In collaboration with the advocacy group Pro Schweiz, the SVP has launched an initiative to safeguard Swiss neutrality. Again, is that really what they want? Or are there other things going on? Which seeks a referendum to inscribe a stringent definition of neutrality in the Swiss constitution. If it is passed, it would ban Switzerland from joining a defense alliance like NATO unless the country was directly attacked. Who does this benefit? Russia. If it collects 50,000 signatures, it must be put to a vote, said Fabian Molina, a Swiss politician with the left-leaning Social Democratic Party. Quote, the SVP wants to defend Swiss neutrality to defend Switzerland's economic foreign policy. The Swiss became very rich in the last 100 years by not having to take a stand on anything but being an offshore platform for sometimes questionable businesses. We survived 2 world wars and benefited from trading with Nazis, he said. Now, this is a Swiss politician saying this, right? This isn't someone outside having a go at Switzerland for that, and Swiss people go, hang on, that's really unfair. You can't. No, this is a Swiss politician. Is he pointing out fact here? Is he pointing out reality? I don't know. You tell me. So while Molina said his party is supportive of re-exporting Swiss weapons, Alain Berset, Switzerland's president, who hails from the same political group, has said it isn't possible in the current legal framework, which might technically be true, right? He warned against war frenzy and said Swiss weapons should not be used in a war. Pacifism has a bad reputation right now, but warfare is not part of the Swiss DNA, he said in an interview. The Kremlin, however, has been the beneficiary of pacifist ideology in Europe. Although Berset retracted his war frenzy comment, the Russian ambassador to Switzerland was quick to latch onto it and seized the chance to once again call the United States a hegemon, supreme power, that is refusing to accept a multipolar world. Multipolar meaning many polars, many poles, like instead of being just one hegemon, being many power centers in the world. I know I'm defining words and you know what these words mean, but plain English. So a multipolar world would be, power in the US, okay, maybe, but then BRICS, China and Russia and other power centers, maybe Europe. And part of Russia's doctrine has been that actually there can't be a multipolar world. They can't have that. It's not part of their DNA. So it has to be a unipolar world with Russia, in that. It might be Russia and China, but certainly Russia has to be in there. Okay, sorry. Anti-Americanism and whataboutism are popular among both the populists and pacifists in Europe. And people still mistrust US intentions because it invaded Iraq. But Russia's war in Ukraine is not linked to Iraq and has been overwhelmingly condemned at the UN. At least 4 or 5 other legal proposals are pending, so this is back to Switzerland explicitly, including a so-called Lex Ukraine, which would allow a one-time transfer of material to Kyiv. One motion that is gaining traction among some Swiss politicians says the Swiss government could revoke the re-export clause if weapons are being sent to a conflict condemned by 2/3 of the UN General Assembly for violating international law. A government official told FP Foreign Policy on the condition of anonymity that legally it should be possible to, quote, uphold neutrality and let third countries supply Swiss weapons, close quotes. At least 2 observers of the Swiss arms industry, a government official and a military expert from a European country based in Switzerland, told FP that when it came to wars in poorer nations, Switzerland has simply turned a blind eye to the re-export of its weapons. But now Russia is involved, the debate is more politicized. Ooh, that's interesting. Swiss weapons have ended up in Afghanistan. The Swiss Sig Sauer 551 assault rifles are used by Saudi forces in Yemen, including against civilians, and it hyperlinks that claim. Furthermore, according to one research report, hyperlinked again, Swiss components are also found in some of Russia's most modern military systems. And of course, if that is all true, which it appears to be, and there's some receipts shown there, then that Swiss neutrality argument is done for. Or at least, they are just picking and choosing when they're being neutral. And it finishes, Switzerland's glaring double standards are raising the question of whether the neutrality doctrine is tenable at all anymore. Benno Zog, a former senior researcher with the Zurich-based think tank Center for Security Studies and now head of strategy and international affairs at the Swiss Ministry of Defense, said, and earlier, wrote a research paper on Swiss neutrality and said some believe neutrality is ingrained in Swiss identity, but he also represented the other argument. Quote, in contrast, the core of neutrality, essentially abstention in interstate war, has lost much of its meaning in the 21st century state system, he wrote, as non-state actors and threats have become prevalent and states are increasingly interdependent. This is going back to, I talked to you about 5th generation warfare. As you go through the different styles of war or different types, categorization of warfare, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, I think it's 4th generation warfare, includes non-state actors. We're starting to see, terrorism and so on and so forth, and entities that don't fall into this state situation, and this makes the whole neutrality thing even more complicated to maintain. So, but I won't go down that road now. I just thought this is a really interesting article, and I'd be very interested to see what you'll think, and particularly if you're Swiss, is this something you recognize, that there are differing reasons why people want to be neutral in Swiss Parliament, depending on whether you're left wing or right wing, and it looks like the right wing are also, it's also more complicated by the right wing in Switzerland being more aligned with Putin, and perhaps even connected to elements of the Kremlin governance. I don't know. Let me know what you think. All right, let's go on to a couple more just quick pieces here before we wrap things up. Goodness me, I've been going on 38 minutes. Right. This is the Kerch Bridge, still the rail section still not in a good state. There were claims that this would be fixed, pretty quickly. No, the road section has been fixed, but the rail section, considering the Russians operate a railway army, it's a rail section that is, so there's a road section there. It's a railway that is more important for getting their supplies. Crimea is, or the Kerch Bridge, sorry, is super important, as we can see from this map, for getting rail supplies not only to Crimea and out of Crimea, but also up to Melitopol, to Kherson, to this whole southern region. You take that out, and rail linkages have to come in from the east, but then you've got to get past Volnovakha and this kind of interdicted area of rail, and it all gets increasingly difficult. So that's super important. And we've had Jankoi that was hit the other night. The rail there was hit. So Ukrainians know what they're doing with regards to sorting out the Russian logistics, and that's an ongoing target for them. All the different forms of logistics. Right. Last thing is Tataragami saying having a thread on tear gas. So the use of tear gas. Let's have a little look at this. Sorry. The use of tear gas in warfare is a growing trend, with different tactical adaptations being employed. One such adaptation involves the use of tear gas dropped from drones near dugouts. This tactic is aimed at flushing out defenders and gaining a tactical advantage. Of course, tear gas isn't chemical weapons. It is a chemical weapon, of course it is, but it's kind of like it's just about all right. I mean, it gets used against rioters and so on and so forth. But of course, it's where do you draw the line? It's the arbitrary line. I could bore you about the Socrates paradox and the philosophy here, but when you want to demarcate on a continuum, you have to understand that most of the time that kind of demarcation is arbitrary, and often it's quite difficult to rationally uh, um, justify exactly why you drew the line exactly there. Um, anyway, it continues. The use of tear gas in this way is often followed by a second drone dropping fragmentation grenades, which can result in casualties among those who have left their dugout. So you flush them out with the tear gas, and then as they're now out of their dugouts, so they're not protected by the dugouts, you then drop the IEDs on them. Whereas if you just drop the IEDs on those trenches or dugouts, you wouldn't do any damage at all because they're basically under the ground. So you drop the gas to flush them out. Interesting. Tear gas can also be used during enemy assaults. After forcing our troops to leave their dugouts with gas, the enemy may use mortar strikes followed by an infantry assault on weakened or abandoned positions. And here there's a bit of a infographic to help you understand that. The gas is typically contained in a K-51 chemical hand grenade or other containers, including improvised ones. It has been confirmed that regular military issued gas masks provide good protection against the gas. The enemy sometimes drops 2 or 3 of these to maximize effect. Additional danger lies in the fact that the type of gas being released is not always clear and can be difficult to identify, particularly when it is released from unmarked containers. So, the question that he goes on to talk about is, do they still need to be issued gas masks? Is this an important part of their kit? Anyway, that interesting. What do you think about that? What do you think about all of the topics I've talked about today? Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. If you want to support the channel, you can pop along to uasupporter.com/ATP. Anything bought from that website, a little bit of commission goes back to my channel, or you can just support my channel all the ways below in the description, or you can just watch the videos and comment and just be the awesome people you are. Thank you so much for hanging out. Please check out my videos tomorrow where I'll be back to my normal routine. Speak soon.